So we're very good at taking care of the at-risk side and the excellers. We have nothing for the middle.
I've heard from people and say, it's normal to struggle. God puts us in the world to struggle. This is not me.
The idea that a 14-year-old should go to school till 8 at night, it's unnatural.
Right? If this was anything else, we would look at it and say there's something systemic.
The idea that we go to school to learn knowledge, to acquire knowledge, I think is a failed concept.
Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side.
Here we are. Welcome, Avremi.
Thank you, Eli.
I'm sitting here with Avremi Avremi Gourarie. Okay, so a couple of things to get out of the way. Obviously, we've spoken in the past. We've spoken with your wife, Dini, and Yocheved Saidoff about a project we started together, the Yocheved Gourarie Kindness Award.
Correct.
In memory of your dear daughter, Yocheved, who passed in 2020, I believe, from a suicide. We're not going to go into that. It may come up, but we're not going to go into that story today. For those interested in that story, they can go to the Mislabeled podcast. I'll give a shout out. I think by the time this episode is published, we might be the two guests with the most views.
Maybe. Hope
on,
so.
On Mislabeled.
Hope so.
So
I know
we'll
I'm
see.
up there.
What?
I know I'm up there, so yeah.
Yes, you're up there. So, right, you're already up there. So you're hoping that I got it.
Bring you with me.
Okay. So anyone who wants to hear your the story there can go there. I want to go into some other topics, and there's a reason why I want to have it specifically with you. So I feel like we share something in common, and that's that on some level we've seen the underbelly of the beast, as I like to call it. And what I mean by that is that maybe when the average person, let's talk about Crown Heights because I grew up there and you used to live there. Maybe when the average person walks into festivity at Crown Heights, they see a number of people hanging out and like, oh, what a nice group of people. And everyone seems okay. And we're having a festivity, and we're saying, cordial hellos and goodbyes. Sure. But I know certain things, and you know certain things. When I see the room, I know the person who called me about the child who was sexually abused. I know the guy who was accused of sexually abusing others. I know the person who's cheated on their wife and they're in therapy. I know the family whose child is dealing with a drug addiction, has been in rehab multiple times. I've seen the underbelly of the beast, in other words. Not necessarily that I'm thinking in this way constantly when I'm scanning the room. When I was involved with JCW, it was literally that way. I remember one time it was my sister, L'chaim. She's probably married 8 or 9 years now. This is, figure 2014 or so. And at her L'chaim, I counted 7 people who came over to me to tell me they were abused or their child was abused.
It's a very high number.
Very high number. And it wasn't that there weren't 15. I just only was able to speak to 7 people that night. My conversations were from when I came till I left. Eventually, I realized this conversation was too much, and I slowly transitioned out of that work. But because of the nature of, I think, your personality, number one, but number two, what's happened to you is people feel very comfortable sharing their stories with you. So you as well have seen the underbelly of the beast.
Sure have.
What have you seen?
I've seen that beneath the shiny surface, and let me just say at the outset, while we're going to kind of rag on our neighborhood, your old neighborhood, my current neighborhood, there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of great things that happen over there. It's a beautiful neighborhood. A lot of chesed. Schools, for the most part, are doing a decent job, I would say. Some better than others. But there are a lot of challenges, and those challenges should be met head on. And what I'm seeing is stories of people that are depressed, that are suicidal, that have eating disorders, that come from dysfunctional families and have all kinds of mental health challenges. And even those that come from regular families, not only the dysfunctional families, but even people that come from regular families, they are challenged and they can't often talk about it because no one's listening to them. And the parents are sometimes embarrassed to talk to anyone about it. And I think it's better than it was years ago. I think we're talking about things a lot more than was the case many years ago. But we need to do more work.
Right. The problem's also bigger than it was. To be clear, it's definitely coming from a place of love on my part. You're part of the community. My family still is. But I do think a knife needs to be taken in certain areas, just a surgeon's knife.
Absolutely.
There's no question. There's certain things that have to be cut out. And before we take the knife to it, we have to put it under a microscope. We have to talk about it. The average parent 20 years ago that said, abuse doesn't happen in our community, we don't have to worry about that here, was someone saying that was in the norm.
Correct.
My parents thought that.
Right.
As an example. Many thought that. It's not in our community. We'll see it on the news about some such things. It doesn't happen in our community. We're protected. I think at this point, most people know that it does happen in our community. Everything happens in our community. However, some people don't even know things. I was listening to your podcast on Mislabeled, and over there you said that until you found out from a doctor that your daughter was engaged in self-harm, you didn't even know the concept existed. Right?
That's correct.
That's correct. And there are those type of things that we did not know existed. And we're not having this conversation, I don't think.
By the way, that speaks to a problem in the American medical community. My daughter was under the age of 18 at the time. She must have asked her therapist or her doctor not to tell us. I feel it was his obligation to tell us, and he didn't tell us.
Right. You had mentioned that there, and
So
it definitely...
There are a lot of kind of things that need to be tightened up.
Oh, we're not... There's no exceptions to this. We're a part of this community, and we want to focus on certain things. And it's not to put a microscope on something that we've heard one time. Let's talk about this. There are definitely things that are repeated. Self-harm, as an example. The amount of young women you've spoken to engage in this?
Very high numbers.
Very high numbers. Right? And it needs to be understood.
I believe there's a school in Crown Heights. Someone told me they have a cutting club.
A cutting club?
The girls get together. They self-harm in groups. I don't understand what that means, but that's what I was told.
Wow. Yeah. I remember the first time I saw it, I was 13 or 14 years old. And a kid who was struggling a lot. He wasn't part of the... I was out of town for yeshiva, a Chabad yeshiva. And this guy was around in the Chabad houses there in the community. He wasn't totally involved. A few years older than me. So maybe he was under 18, because I remember he told me that when he's 18, he's going to commit suicide. I remember that. And it was very jarring for me. I was only 13 or 14 years old. And he explained to me why he's going to, because there's an inheritance coming to him, and he wants to make sure his sister gets it and not his father, or exactly something like that. But in any case, he showed me on his leg, like he showed me the marks of the cuts on his leg. That was the first time I was introduced to it. And the reason I'm bringing up that story is that it's not only the kids engaged in self-harm that we need to worry about. That was very traumatic for me. When I was 13 or 14 years old, I heard about this guy who was planning on committing suicide at 18 and was engaged in self-harm. That rocked my world. That definitely, there was something I was going through that I needed to be supported through, or would have benefited from being supported through, and didn't have the language to speak to anyone about, or the comfort.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it was a male friend of yours. I find that I hear the stories mostly from women, young girls that self-harm. By the way, in my experience, I talk mainly to young women and not men, which is to the we can praise women here because they are more comfortable opening up. Guys that age do not open up as comfortably as girls do.
True.
That's my experience.
I hear what you're saying. At the same time, some of that is the nature of people feeling comfortable speaking to you because of your cheved.
You think so?
100%, because women are more comfortable opening up. I agree with you on that, and especially from a younger age. But I speak to more men than women because I speak about being sexually abused as a male. I think more men are able to, even though there's sexual abuse female, when I speak, they're more comfortable. Yeah. And certainly from the porn addiction conversation, that happens. That being said, a lot of the maybe closer relationships that I've developed with people where I've been able to, not just a conversation, but kind of move it forward, that we have some sort of consistent dialogue and I'm seeing some improvement or benefit, and it wasn't just one conversation with me sharing something, have been because of a woman in their life that's pushing them, either a mother or a daughter. So I'm not discounting what you're saying completely. What I'm saying is I was focusing more on the fact that the problems exist by men, meaning the boys are struggling too. That's what I'm saying.
What kind of question is that?
Yeah.
There's not, without a doubt.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It's self-harm as well, because you acted surprised that a boy was cutting himself. Or
well, in the same sense that, with eating disorders, it's more common for women to suffer from eating disorders.
Understood. Okay. You're saying that particular problem, self-harm, is more common.
There was a young man
women.
that Yocheved knew who had an eating disorder, and she actually helped him get placed in a program. Today he's happily married. Shidduch that she actually made. They got married after she passed. So there are, obviously, it exists. I mean, I remember visiting her in the hospital in the eating disorder ward. Many girls, a couple of guys.
100%. Yeah. Same thing with sex addiction, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Many guys, a couple of women.
Yeah.
Women call themselves love addicts when they have the same problem.
Exactly. Makes it part of.
It's okay.
Is it actually?
Okay. Fine. It's a very Jewish thing to be able to laugh during heavy conversations. So.
Is it?
Yes.
Hij tracht en God lacht. You know that saying?
Yes. Okay, so what are we thinking about? So we're speaking about the underbelly of the beast a little bit. That these problems are real, and they're virtually, I would say at this point, virtually in every family.
I would say you're right.
Right. I remember a speech, a dear friend of mine, Schneer Kaplan, said, "Ein bias asher ein shames." He said this line. I don't know where it was from, but
that's correct.
And
every family would like to think that it's not going to happen to us until it does.
Right.
Yeah, me for sure not. I'm great.
Right. If this was anything else, we would look at it and say there's something systemic. So, being that we're going to say it clearly, there is something systemic.
I think it is systemic, and then we can talk about the causes and possible fixes. Obviously, there's something not quite right. I mean, you and I have spoken about this, and you've impressed upon me the idea that we have to kind of be forward-looking and figure out how to make sure that these problems don't exist, suicides don't happen again, and what do we look inwards as a community to figure out and what we can do better.
So look inwards individually and as a community.
Yeah, well, as a community, we have to look inwards because there are schools,
100%.
There are school policy, there are community policies. Is everything right, or is something can there be improvement in some areas that'll help the general well-being of the community's mental health?
Yeah, I saw an analogy recently. It said if you saw a plant and its leaves were wilted, and brown, you wouldn't say it has wilting leaf syndrome.
Exactly.
Right. You would say that something is not optimal in its environment.
Beautiful. Love it.
And when you're having this at scale, something is not optimal in the environment.
Absolutely.
Something is not. Something is 100% not optimal. These are not, and it's not normal either. Meaning, I've heard from people and say it's normal to struggle. God puts us in the world to struggle. This is not normal.
Yeah.
This is not. This is way past the level of normal. Self-harm, not normal. Suicide, not normal. These things are not normal. They're not normal. Addiction, very heavy addiction, not normal. These are not.
Absolutely.
And we have to look at it as problems that could be uprooted, should be uprooted. What's normal? Normal is most people have stress over finances on some level or another. Whether your stress is putting food on your table or whether it's paying your employees. Everyone has, right? That's normal. That's normal. Most people are figuring out how to control their desires and manage that with, a level of discipline and everything else. Most people have to work hard to raise their kids. There are things, those are normal. Those are normal. Not normal as in common, normal as in there's enough struggle in those that we will have fulfilled the mission of God putting us in a world and struggling if we just have to wrestle with our own internal desires,
Exactly.
raising our kids, paying our bills. Like it's enough problems for us. We're there. But when you're talking about severe addiction, to the point, addiction is not a desire problem. Addiction, they say addiction ends in one of three places: institutions, jails, or death. Right? That's where it goes. Mental institution, jail, or death. That's what a severe addiction gets to those. We're talking about very, very severe kind of issues, and it's systemic. So we'd say, let's look at the soil. So what do you think?
So that's exactly it. You know, most of us are engaged in conversations where we're trying to tackle individual problems. How do we tackle abuse? How do we tackle eating disorders? How do we tackle depression, and so on? But let's go younger, where the kids are younger, and figure out what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong. And I think there's a very easy way, and that is, you know, I'm coming here to Florida. My speaking tour has been interrupted. I've been going around the schools in Crown Heights, drumming up support for the Avremi Gourarie Kindness Award, and
Beautiful.
I'm looking at the different classes and the different schools, and I'm saying to myself, like, what should we be observing from kids that tell us that they're happy or not happy, resilient or not resilient? And I think it's quite easy. If we really pay attention, we can tell if a kid is unhappy. And by unhappy, I don't mean that they're, you know, jumping off the rafters, but just, you know, looking fulfilled, looking satisfied, looking well balanced.
Can we take a step back?
Sure.
Are we assuming that most people would consider this the barometer of good or bad?
No, of course
Is that an assumption? Some people will say,
No, of course not.
I don't care if they are. I want to know if they're
exactly
following
most
the rules.
People, exactly right. Most people do. Most educators and most parents do. We have a bunch of check boxes. Learn 10 hours a day, daven 3 times a day, dress in a certain way. We have a good child. But they don't look at the very basic level. Do I have a happy child? Am I looking at, I think I heard you say the word attuned in a different podcast. Are we attuned to the pain,
to the inner world,
inner happiness or pain of the child that we're trying to rear? And this is going to have an effect later on in life. And I find that most of the schools, what's going on is most of the schools are accepting children, saying, "Wait, we want perfect child, and this is the perfection." And you got to kind of fill in the spaces. You got to check off all the boxes, and that's we don't tolerate anything less than that. But shouldn't it be where we take a child who has a lot of, you know, a lot to learn, a lot to grow, maybe some challenges in different areas. One has a learning disability, one has a social awkwardness, and then build the child up. And understand that when a child is acting up in class, it's not because they're necessarily a bad child, but because they got certain pains that they have to deal with, or certain unfulfilled desires, just on a very basic level. So I want to actually give a shout out to a school in Crown Heights, and that is Darchim Menachem, because both this year and last year when I went to speak there, you could see. And I was talking to Rabbi Pekar over there.
Is that Mendy Vale involved in that?
Mendy Vale, yeah.
Okay.
And I was going around the class, and Rabbi Pekar looked at me and took the words out of my mouth. He says, "Whatever you're looking over here is real." And there are children running around, and there's, you know, nothing's perfect. But the teachers, everyone's calm, everyone's doing their job. They understand that they're working with real products that they got to mold. So
maybe mold is the wrong word.
I'm sorry?
Maybe mold is the wrong word.
I always have the wrong words.
No, I maybe because, right, that was,
I'm sorry.
You took it out of my mouth because I had a conversation with Huva Shandelman, and she said that instead of trying to mold a child, we should help them unfold.
Unfold.
Right? Which
Exactly.
is, I think that's part of the problem.
Diamond,
Exactly.
Right. That is
And they're
right.
each individual. This concept of chanoch lenar al pidarka, right?
Exactly.
Educate a child according to their way. There's an individual.
That's not happening.
You don't feel like it's happening.
Not at all.
When I talk about the wilting leaf thing, that's what I think happens is we see this. We see a child who's struggling, and we say they don't fit it. Let's cut them out. Right. That's the approach versus saying, what is it telling us about everything else? But I do want to go back to that point, is that for so many of us, I've heard this, I felt this with myself, and I mean, I've had these conversations. I'll say this is an exact conversation this was several years ago, where someone reached out that their son was struggling with addiction. And I always say the same thing to people. I can't talk to you about someone else. I can talk to them about them and you about you.
Right.
If you're struggling with the fact that you're struggling with your child and you want to talk about that, then I can talk to you about, how you can be in a better place regardless of where your child is at. But if you want to talk about the child, then he has to call me. Said it wasn't a child. He was, over 20 for sure. And he was struggling with addiction heavily. But it wasn't only addiction. It was depression. It was general lethargy, not caring about work, nothing. He didn't have much meaning. And it was clear that he felt a lot of pressure from his parents to fit a certain mold religiously. And, I shared that with him and said, sometimes it's hard to feel the energy when we're living someone else's life. Like, don't be afraid. We can, we find something beautiful, and sometimes we have to step out a little bit. It's not like, see where that goes. But to me, I'm looking at it as someone who's half dead and saying, what's going to make him feel alive? What's going to make him feel alive? Anyway,
How old is this person?
In his 20s.
Right. So you understand that that's easy for a 20-year-old to do that. But what about an 8-year-old that's been held to this very high standard and they're not shaping up?
100%.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
They don't have that option.
Yeah. Anyway, fast forward, the mom calls me a little bit later, and I said that the mom was kind of pushing on the religiousness of the child and getting married and everything else. And I said, there's other stuff going on here. He's not particularly happy. He's depressed. He doesn't have a lot of energy. He doesn't have a lot of motivation. I feel like if he gets married, everything will be okay. I said, okay, you're calling me. I don't see that. And it's not, I don't think marriage is going to take care of problems. And if you want me to introduce you to a couple of people who are married and miserable, I can find a few. I'm sure some
That's a common problem.
I know, of course.
Speaking to a friend of my son the other day, he's not happy. When I'll be happy, when I'll get married and I'll have a companion, I'll find happiness. So first you got to be happy now. Success breeds success. If you're happy now, you'll be happy when you get married.
Yeah, I'll be more miserable.
Exactly.
And I have two miserable people together. In any case, when I pushed the mom and I said, okay, let's imagine there's two choices here. I'm not saying there are, but let's imagine there are. One is that your child is happy, but not embracing Judaism. Not embracing Judaism in the way you want. I didn't imagine a world for him where he'd walk away completely, but not embracing it in the way you may want. Or the other is he's not quite happy, but he's following the path. And when I put it like that, she said, to be honest, I'd be happier if he was religious, if he was following those things. That's what she said. I said, okay. I said, just realize this. I said, I just want you to know this. You're calling me for advice. That means you think I have something to offer your child. This I don't have, because that's not my path. At that time, I wasn't keeping Shabbos. I wasn't eating kosher. That's not where I was in my life. And I said, you're calling me for those things. I don't have that to offer you. I can't help you. I think this is common. I think this was a moment of honesty where she said what many people think. If you actually gave them the choice, many parents, and said, do you want a child who's happy or do you want a child who's religious? They would choose religious.
I find it shocking.
Why,
Go ahead.
That's just to bring it back. Because you said I walk into a school and the kids are not happy. I'm saying I don't know that most people see that as a barometer. I don't think most people care.
So in my experience, if you actually, I'm shocked that this lady told you this, because in my experience, if you kind of break it down from or happy and miserable, or from miserable but happy, I think you may have a point. Let me have a happy child. So I'm shocked that this lady actually kind of admitted to that.
Yeah, it took me asking the question several different ways and really putting it to her, why can't I have both? I'm saying imagine a world where it can't be.
Let's ask ourselves a question.
Yes.
Why does a family in Crown Heights, from family, want their kids to be really, really from? Why? You ever thought about that? Why is it so important to them?
I would imagine they think this is the best life for them. This would be what's best for them. I imagine if you ask them, coming from a sincere place, that's what they believe, that this would be best for them. What do you think?
Perhaps that has to do with their insecurities as a frum person. and they're living out their insecurities vicariously through their children. In many cases, because we see this. We have a school in Crown Heights. Can I mention names of schools in Crown Heights?
I've publicly attacked Altair. You're fine.
Okay, so let's talk about Altair. I'm not attacking Altair actually over here. Altair, they call it the flagship school of Lubavitch. It's flagship in the sense that it was established. I think there was a Rabbi Tadelbaum that approached the Rebbe, and they wanted to make a school, what they call Apitaras HaKodesh, which only taught Limud HaKodesh, only taught Jewish studies, was perfect and strict all the way when it came to religion. But I think by design, that was supposed to be a school for not everyone. It wasn't supposed to be the whole community. So it was supposed to be for families and students that could hack it. And for them, it's good. They could learn all day, they could daven all day, and so on. What happened was that it became known as the school of Lubavitch, and every parent wants to get their child into Altair. And if you look around as families, many of those families don't maintain the religious standards or Hasidic standards, hashkafically or halachically, that Altair upholds. And it's this constant struggle back and forth. So what's actually happening is that these parents are sending their children to schools that they don't belong in because of their own, I need my kid to be a frum kid because then he'll be...
Right, but this obviously isn't always the case. This is sometimes the case.
In many cases.
Right.
Obviously, if you you can look at the student body. Obviously, those very, very Hasidic families, that's not the case.
Right.
But Altair, the majority...
No, I meant differently. I meant if you're asking parents why they want their children to be religious, I think that there is a good reason embedded in that. I mean, why do you want your children to be religious?
That's changed over the years. That's actually changed. So I'm guilty of what we're talking about over here, And over time, I realized that I need well children and happy children over religion. And
religion, but do you want them to? You live religious today. Do you want them to be religious? Ideally, do you want them to live?
I'm in a very unique position, right? Because I'm a victim of a tragedy.
Right.
So I have extreme views on this matter. And that is that where I stand right now, which might not have been the case years ago, it would be nice if they're religious.
Why would it be nice?
Because ideally, obviously it's the right way to live, but only if it doesn't come at the expense of their happiness.
Understood. No, understood.
Right? So I'm not going to push it. I have adult children at this point. And, so maybe one can judge me and say, well, if you had 8-year-olds, you wouldn't say the same thing. But where I stand today, and I tell other parents the same thing. You want a happy child. If they need to find religion, they'll find religion. Now, I asked you earlier about...
But ideally, you want that for them.
I think so.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think it's great.
That's fine.
I think it's beautiful. I imagine wanting that in some way for my children, but I don't imagine wanting it with any of the heaviness that I was...
Well, that
raised.
brings us to another subject, of course, without the heaviness.
And not at the expense of many other things.
But heaviness is a price. I don't want to pay any of the prices. Heaviness is one of those prices. Absence of fun is a price. Not having any physical activity is a price. Being forced to study Gemara 10 hours a day is a price for the majority of children. Right? We think that's the norm, to send children to school to sit from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening at the age of 14.
So what is the price that you are willing to pay? I mean, you pay more for kosher food. You pay more for...
At this point where I stand today, and again,
You're a victim of a tragedy, I understand.
At this point, I'm not willing to pay any price. It has to come from the inside. It has to come from, my son wants to be religious. He has to decide on his own why it's beautiful for him. And for me, the priority is, are you happy today? Are you feeling fulfilled? Are you sad? Are you fulfilled? Do you have meaning in your life? Do you have good friends? Are you socially well-adjusted, and so on? Yes, religion is beautiful, and for me, that's ultimately ideal. Let's call it an ideal. Ideals are not always practical.
Right.
So ideally, yes, should you be religious? I have my own shortcomings when it comes to religion. Not always perfect. In fact, I'm mostly imperfect. So how could I ask that of my children when I don't have it myself? I should find it, and they should find it. One of the things that... Can we talk about plant medicine?
We'll get there. Go ahead.
No, it's connected to something that.
No, go ahead. We can talk about everything. Yeah, it's kind of yeah.
So, the last time I did plant medicine, I actually came back to my son. I said to him, "This is what I thought about whilst I was in plant medicine." I said, the following thought occurred to me. We're both far from perfectly religious. We're both victims of the same system. We're both brought up in families. You got to be religious, right? So we did it. So I'm doing it by rote. I'm in my 50s. So I'm not going to change what I do today. You're much younger, so you're making more radical changes, perhaps. You know what I'd really love? Let's both of us start again, like from scratch. Maybe we should both enroll in a Balchuva yeshiva. We're not from Balchuva families. And go into my uncle Rabbi Majeski, who runs the Balchuva Women's Seminary. Start from scratch and come at it from a place of love, place of ease, enjoyment. Experience Judaism in a beautiful way, in a joyous way. I'm not saying everything about our Judaism is not joyous, but the fact of the matter is that I grew up in a house where my father was very strict. If I didn't daven, it was a problem. If I didn't learn, it was a problem. My older brother was a better learner, more Chassidish than I was, and he took it out on me. There's no question about that. So I'd really love that opportunity, which I haven't really taken. Haven't grabbed that opportunity yet. I should start again. Let's explore this again. This religion. Behave like any other Balchuva.
I've had this opportunity myself to do this, and it's awesome.
It's awesome.
Not the yeshiva, but it didn't happen on purpose. I didn't stop practicing because I thought I would come back to practicing and find new meaning in it.
Right.
It just the way it worked. But had it been continuous, it wouldn't have been the same. Had it been with the same heaviness, it wouldn't have been the same.
So let's just say that for most people it's that way. Most people have the heaviness.
Okay.
I'm gonna get criticized for this. I know, but
of course. One second. Of course, people are going to listen to this and say that these ideas are crazy because they're living the way they're living. I'm saying they're crazy.
Yeah.
And what's my proof? I have good proof that they're crazy. The proof is that their children are addicted. Their children are engaged in self-harm. Many of them are unhappy.
You're taking it to an extreme. If they're.
But what's
the extreme? Then addiction, self-harm, abuse, and so on.
But what's the extreme?
Unhappy children, just unhappy,
right, exactly.
Unfulfilled people.
What's the extreme? The extreme is showing us what's in the whole system. If I have a garden where there isn't proper soil, everything is good one day.
Right.
And slowly over time, it starts eroding. It's not everything is going to die in one fell swoop.
Right.
That's not usually the way it happens. Things start dying at the corners because they're a little bit more sensitive. They don't necessarily have the protection from everything else. The things that are a little bit younger, which haven't had the time to root in the ground. Then there's certain kind of trees that are more sensitive to the environment or certain kind of plants. But they're all telling us the same story. That's my point. My point is not, what we've tried to do is say, oh, there's one child who's severely addicted, but of course his family is good because look, there was someone else who grew up to be a Chassid Shabachar. So obviously this is the issue.
Right.
No. These severely addicted, these engaging in self-harm, the suicide, whatever it is that's happening, is telling us a story. It's telling us a story about the macro.
Right, describing the narrative.
And it's telling us a story in the micro, in the community as well.
That's very true.
And that's my point, that there's an infection that exists deeply, deeply, deeply embedded into the community. And then when it starts manifesting itself in the more sensitive people, our approach has been to try to cut out those that are more sensitive.
That's right.
Instead of saying, what are they telling us about the entire problem? That's what I'm saying.
Beautiful. Love it. Couldn't agree with you more.
Good. So I understand that you're going to hear some of what we're saying. Ridiculous. You have your yarmulke. It doesn't look like it came from exactly out of a Crown Heights Judaica store, right? Mine certainly hasn't.
Came from Ben Yehuda Street.
What?
Ben Yehuda.
Right. So I'm saying there are certainly ways where ways I am for sure. So of course people are going to say we're a little bit crazy. What argument I'm making is that you and I have seen things in the community that the average person in the community has not seen. And if you saw what I saw, you would think this way. I think there are certain people in the community who has. I think, for example, Rabbi Yossi Jacobson is someone who has. He's seen so much of the trauma. For whatever reason, he's been a lightning rod for people coming to him and feeling very comfortable sharing their stories. And I know people ask him, why do you talk about trauma so much? Because that's what he hears about constantly. He gives a Torah class, and the person doesn't come to bait with him about a Gemara, which may seem to contradict something in the Torah class. The person comes to him to say that when he was a child, he was sexually abused. And the other person comes to him to say that I just found out my husband was cheating on me. That's what he's hearing, and he's seeing these stories. So what is he going to talk about? So I think there are certain people who've seen the underbelly of the beast. And if more people saw it, unfortunately, I can't do it, right? I can't take all the names of people who've shared their private stories with me and put it out into the ether. But a few years ago, I worked on Mic Drop, and stories started to be told. And Rabbanim shut it down very quickly, maybe with good reason. I wasn't trying to bring it to the community. In fact, I don't think the community was ready for what was going to come. If a lot of stories started to be told in the community, there would have been a problem that there are not enough therapists in Brooklyn to deal with, not enough healers to deal with. It would have come out too far, too fast. I understood where they came from. I didn't agree necessarily with their methodology, and I didn't agree necessarily with some other things that went on there. But in concept, I think that would have proven to be very dangerous if too much came out too fast. So I'm not recommending this full open Kimura. What I'm saying is, hopefully there's a level of trust from those listening to us on two parts. Number one, we're not coming to attack the community. Not at all.
Absolutely not.
Number two is we've seen a lot, and we've seen enough to say that this infection has reached every level, top to bottom, every family, north to south, rich to poor, everyone. And everyone has a responsibility to look at this and say, what is it? There are certain fundamental values that we are teaching and saying, this is our value. And those values, it's infected at that level, at our highest values are infected. That's the argument I'm making.
How do we fix it?
I think we have to start asking questions. I think your start was a good start, right? If we said, what is the barometer? What is the barometer? I learned this sikha a few weeks ago. It said, it was an Eish Tamid Tukadal Mizbeach, Leisichba, right? This was concepts of, I think, Parshas Tzav. So we're recording this, Parshas Avremi Kadeshim. So whenever it comes out, it comes out. But it was sikha from the Rebbe, obviously. And he said something very powerful, which like certain ones like hit me like not they hit me, they changed me. The information becomes like, so he was saying that, you have the Mizbeach, right? In the temple, and then you Mizbeach internally. Right? Just this concept that there's the temple, the third temple to be one day, the first and second temple, and then there's the internal one. So this mitzvah today is for an internal one. Eish Tamid Tukad al Mizbeach Leisich, but there's a fire that's supposed to be on the Mizbeach that does not go out. What is Mizbeach? It's the heart. And it says, Tamid, right? It should always be there. Afilu betuma and afilu b'Shabbos. I think he quotes a Rambam or Rashi that says that even when someone is impure, they should still have a fire burning. There should still be that. And I thought, from me, what I took from it was people should be passionate, and we shouldn't be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of bringing out someone's passion, even if we view them as being in a state of impurity, in a state of tumah. They should always be in a state of passion. So if that became the barometer in schools, I think that should be the mission statement for every school. That I want children who are fiery and passionate. Constantly. This should be that's the ideal. What's the ideal?
It's a good analogy because their passions are being quieted.
Exactly. Because they're
being put down like, oh no.
Their personalities are quieted. Their individuation is.
Their talents.
Exactly.
Sports,
you're musically
art,
gifted.
Music, yeah. None of it's recognized.
Can you imagine a life without music for you?
It was very difficult growing up and trying to develop this.
It was considered non-religious in some way.
It wasn't. My father didn't. Wow.
It wasn't embraced.
It wasn't embraced.
It wasn't embraced.
No,
God gave you a gift. Your parents thought it wasn't a good one.
My mother thought I learned to play piano from my
Your
mother.
father, okay.
My father was not impressed.
Not impressed.
I had a guitar, and if I misbehaved, he'd take my guitar away. How does that fit the punishment?
Right. Yeah. Right. If anything, just the opposite. Imagine someone misbehaved. He's like a really good student. I'm going to take your Tanya away.
Exactly.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, God would never do it. Right. Right. This is the idea. It
wasn't easy, and it's actually interesting about music. I'll just say this: So my father never really was not into the fact that I played music, liked music, what kind of music I used to listen to, was not into it. That changed one Shabbos when I went to South Africa with the Pimenta brothers to play an event, and they stayed at my home in South Africa. My father, for the first time, he saw these two gifted musicians who were also scrupulously religious and observant. And kind of something went off in his mind. I said, wow, okay, this can coexist.
Right.
But that was beautiful. But I was always like, you're a smart guy. You couldn't figure that out years ago, that there should be no contradiction.
Fascinating. You know, when you talk about it's fascinating. It's fascinating that it's missed. So when you talk about walking back into that school, right, and you seeing unhappy kids, there's a way to get each of them happy. That's the point.
Absolutely.
And for many kids, there's only one way. Meaning that there are some people who there's a path that is their path. I've met people like this. There's one path for this guy, literally one path that's going to bring out. It's like you can't imagine doing anything else. Like I can imagine myself doing many things. Okay, some people have many passions, many interests, many ways to express themselves, and some feel like it's one. Whatever it is, maybe it's publicly speaking, like they have to be in that setting. Maybe it's I don't know, learning in some way. You can only imagine one, but some it's not. Let's say learning Gemara or something else. Maybe there's a different. They're fascinated by history, or they're fascinated by
exactly because that's the requirement. That's the only way you're a successful kid if you learn Gemara 10 hours a day. That 85% of the kids are walking around with low self-esteem because they don't learn 10 hours Gemara a day. And they have this thing in the back of their head. My parents and my educators think that I'm not perfect.
Right. So this is a fundamental value. When you're going, so when you spoke about Ala Torah, right? Yeah. When you say, okay, there was this idea to create a school for students which are gifted.
Yeah. No, right? All good.
And can learn 10, 12 hours a day. It's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful
thing. What's the problem? When we take this, we make this the ideal and say everyone has to aspire to become this. Exactly. And now you're taking a bunch of children who are not, they're gifted in other ways.
Exactly.
You know, who said it? Was it Albert Einstein? Who said everything? Albert Einstein, Winston Churchill, Mark Twain. One of the three said these things.
These are the three guys you quote.
Right. Everyone is intelligent, but if you take a fish and try to get it to climb a tree, it won't look very much, or something like that, right? Everyone has a certain kind of intelligence. Oftentimes, what we're trying to do is box someone in to this little tiny...
The idea, for example, that in yeshivas, Avremi Gourarie at the age of 18, that the very best, even Mesiftas, the very best Mesiftas and yeshivas don't frown upon sports activities. You've heard this?
Yeah. Or
another yeshiva that I wanted to send my son to. We allow them to play musical instruments, but not guitar. Guitar is a little gauche. Where does this stuff come from?
Right. I know.
So
I remember when I was a kid, I found out, I didn't know it because I grew up a little bit interesting. My parents were about tshuva, so they didn't know all the intricate rules about things.
They probably blindly followed everything.
No, but some of them they didn't find out until later, right? So they didn't find out until, let's say, my oldest brother was 14 or 15, that rollerblades were considered not Chassidish. They had no idea at 8 years old they can't buy their kid rollerblades. And who's going to say anything to a young kid? Right. But I remember finding that out, that rollerblades are not Chassidish. I'm like, what does this mean? What does this stuff mean? We have all these ideas. But this is a fundamental value that needs changing. Absolutely. And the value that needs changing is this little box that we're trying to funnel everyone into. When the truth of the matter is, if you have a community, think of a community. If God was smart enough to build a community that can actually function, he'd make very few people learners. He'd make some. We need some of those people, but he'd also make a few people who are physically gifted, who can lift heavy things. He'd also make a few people who were passionate about helping people. He'd also make a few people who were passionate about music. So when we have a festivity, we have something to play. There are many, if you talk about a community, a society, which is self-efficient, then you're going to have many different things. And it definitely feels like the yeshiva system is designed to create one person. And it works for that.
One of two, I'll say.
Okay, go ahead.
One of two. And this is the problem.
A boy and a girl.
Yeah, right. One of two. And that is the following. That as in life, you can have both extremes. You can have the very successful and those that fail miserably. So we're very good at catering to the very, very successful, those kids that are just do everything, learn all day, do all the hat and jacket, white shirt, everything.
Wait, let's even talk about someone that's passionate, right? Their fire is a flame, right? Fiery passion from this. There are those guys. But how many 13, 14-year-olds?
There are.
They exist.
They exist.
They exist.
And that's fine. We should cater them.
Yeah, I agree.
We're also very good at catering to, we have yeshivas like, Wilkes-Barre and a few others that I forget the name, for kids that couldn't find their way in the mainstream yeshivas, and sometimes they're struggling with addictions and all kinds of things. And
for the at-risk.
At-risk, exactly, thank you.
Right.
So we're very good at taking care of the at-risk side and the excellers. We have nothing for the middle.
The guy who wants to stay from but wants to play music.
Want to stay from, a regular guy, walk down Kingston Avenue, ride my bike, play ball, learn 3 hours of Gemara a day, 4 hours, be from, do the right thing, have interests that go beyond Limud HaKodesh. I'm interested in science, I'm interested in music, in sports, in drama. And I'm from. It's not like I want to not be from. I want to be from. I want to be part of the program.
Right.
There's nothing for those kinds of kids. And where do those kids fall? Some of them fall to the left, some of those kids fall to the right. They're gonna be miserable. They're not gonna
They'll be miserable either way.
Either way.
I felt like that kind of. I enjoyed learning very much, so I didn't have problem in school with that aspect of it. But I couldn't go.
It's interesting you say enjoyed learning. Let's talk about why we go to school in the first place. Is that the barometer? Because I enjoy learning.
I happen to enjoy it, right? I happen to enjoy those things, so it wasn't.
Why do the Frum family send their kid to school?
That's a good question.
Unfortunately, today, Frum families send their children to school to get educated.
On?
Education. In a Frum school, in a Chabad school, it's Limud HaKodesh, Gemara, Chassidus.
Correct.
That shouldn't be the reason one goes to school as a Jewish kid. The reason one should go to school has to be two reasons. A, to rear a child who's well adjusted socially, emotionally. That should be in every school, by the way.
Right.
Not even Jewish. And if we're talking about Jewish, one that will grow up with a love and a passion for Judaism. The knowledge should play a very small role in all of that. Obviously, you need knowledge how to be a Jew and so on. But you should learn how to learn. My kid just went to graduate law school. Do you think he's going to be the best lawyer tomorrow? No. He's going to go through years of apprenticeship, and he'll learn on the job, and he'll learn. But he learned how to learn, how to do it. Same thing with the idea that we go to school to learn knowledge, to acquire knowledge, I think is a failed concept. And this is the reason we force our kids to learn Gemara in an unnatural way for a 14-year-old, 10 hours a day. It's unnatural for children. I went to school in South Africa. At the age of 14, my latest day was 3:30.
Your latest what?
My latest day. The latest I got out of school was 3:30 in the afternoon. Went home, I played with my friends, I had engaged in other activities and so on. But the idea that a 14-year-old should go to school till 8 at night, it's unnatural. Ask any educator. It's just not a good thing. It's good for Mitziyanim. It's good for those that excel, which is why I guess the Rabbeim set it up, for Bachrim to do and so on. And I guess it started with older kids and
so let's talk about Rebbeim setting it up.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about that concept, because very often that feels to me like one of the answers that I'll often get when I start poking holes. Like the Rebbe could have said something about it. The Rebbe said it should be done this way.
The Rebbe did say something about it in the sense that he supported those schools. If the Rebbe didn't only support Al Torah, let's remember that the Bavitch Yeshiva came before Al Torah. The Bavitch Yeshiva had a fully fledged secular curriculum. So if the Rebbe was so into this, he would have only allowed schools like Al Torah to flourish. He gave his bracha to schools in Pittsburgh, in South Africa, in California, which were kind of middle-of-the-road schools. Now, all of these schools, unfortunately, what's happening is they become, as the years progress, you mentioned Montreal earlier, or maybe offline, as the years progress, these schools are becoming more right, because they have this inferiority complex. Let's be like Al Torah, forgetting that just take care of regular kids. It's okay. It's okay to take care of regular kids. Nothing will happen. In fact, good things will happen.
Right. But also, you think about building a community, then you need all of these. What I mentioned about Montreal offline earlier was that when I went to Montreal for yeshiva, I was probably 15 or 16, so I saw a Chabad community. The Chabad community is relatively small there. And in the schools, there's a mix. You have Sephardim, you have people who are more modern. You don't have everyone in the yeshiva. I'm not talking about the like yeshiva gedela that I was in. I'm talking about in the elementary school, that you have people from all walks of life, and it felt much more real than in Crown Heights. Was everyone was looking the same. There was this expectation of being the same.
It's not what the Rebbe set up.
Right.
There were Russians that lived in Crown Heights. My wife should tell you. She's friends to this day with someone that wasn't from then and not from today. The Rebbe encouraged the non-from residents of Crown Heights to attend Beis Rivka, have a Jewish education, whatever that takes.
Right.
And that today, God forbid, if someone is watching television or movie or something, oh, we can't have you in our school.
But is there room for a certain, like, let's take television, or let's say something like television, right? Which the Rebbe has spoken out strongly against that and said there shouldn't be. Maybe there is room to say. So
the Rebbe. So again, this is the issue. That people are myopic. They look at a line the Rebbe said, no television, therefore no television. Otherwise, then you're treif. That's it. But let's talk about it within the confines of education. What does that mean, actually? So years ago, I was doing some research on this very topic. There's a school in Crown Heights many years ago that came out with a rule that it's a girls' school, that any mother, let's just preface, the Rebbe had a shitta. The Rebbe's policy was that women need to cover their hair with a sheitel. Not only just a scarf is not good enough, but with a
wig.
I'm sorry?
A wig.
It's a wig, exactly. So this school came out with a rule that if that the mothers, not the students, the mothers of the students that send their kids to this particular school have to have head coverings. Otherwise, they can't send this kid to school. The idea to me was very, very perplexing, that we're punishing a child what the mother does not do.
Right.
And for me, innately, I just felt that this obviously was not the Rebbe's shitta. And I researched it, and everyone I spoke to told me that, yes, that's exactly right.
But conceptually, would
you have a story
that
I heard from Rabbi Lustig, who told me the following story, that years ago, they wanted to make a rule in Altair that no television, right? So at the time, the Rebbe was around, and I said, "Look, we have to ask the Rebbe if we can make such a rule that from now on, any families that have televisions cannot send their kids to school." So they asked the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, "Ask Rabbi Charakov, who was the Rebbe's right-hand man, because he has a Ras in the Shver, which means he has educational instructions and policy that he inherited from the Fiedeke Rebbe, from the previous Babich Rebbe." And they asked Rabbi Charakov, and Rabbi Charakov shot it down. He said, "Absolutely not. We don't do that. We can educate them, and maybe it'll come back to the home, and the home will decide not to have a television, but we're going to educate the child, notwithstanding the fact whether the home has a television or not, or notwithstanding the fact whether the home is doing something that the Rebbe would not encourage."
Okay, good. So you answered my question. My question was going to be whether or not you feel there's room in an ideal school to have these kind of rules. Meaning, if there is a school like Alatara, right? But you're saying the problem isn't that it exists. The problem is that you've taken a school that's created for the ideal and making it the mainstream, almost the bare minimum. And anyone who's not is learning plumbing as an at-risk youth.
So there are kids there are children that want to be protected. The parents want them to be protected from other children. Don't hang out with the bad kids. Don't hang out with the non-from kids. I think it's a mistake.
Well, it's definitely not Chabad's way, right? We send them with the bad kids.
Thank you. It's a mistake. I'm going to tell another beautiful story that about Rabbi Fitzi Lipska, my wife's uncle, Abba Shalom, that he lived in Morristown, and he has great kids. And one day they came to him and said, "Your son is in a class, and the boys all come from, lesser homes, not so frum, not so chassidish. We're offering you to put your son into a higher class, better class with more boys." He came home and told his wife the story, and he said, "My decision is that we have to be better parents. That's exactly why we send our kid to school. He can be with those boys, and he should be an influence on them, not the other way around." And if they're going to be influenced on him, that means we have to be better parents to show him how to be a positive influence on these friends. And that's natural. You're always going to be in an environment with different kinds of kids. To think that this is not ideal, to be in a classroom with only the best kids.
It's not.
It's not a great thing.
It's not. That's what I was referring to Montreal when I went there as a kid. I was saying like, wow, how nice it is just to see, different shapes, different sizes.
That's still the case.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier about bringing the fun back in, and I'm thinking, let's say for myself, I went through till my 20s. I was from in 20s, so I didn't, which is maybe not exactly the path of a lot of people, because I went through smicha, I went through the system. I did it, and I didn't do it from a place of it necessarily was true to me at the time as a teenager, but I felt like the other was too risky. I don't want to be a dropout. I started this, I'm going to finish this, and the alternative it felt to me like either I'm following this path or I'm off on the streets like with friends doing drugs. I didn't like you're saying the middle, but I was able to hack the learning, so it was okay for me in that way. And then, there were certain things that I did on the side, and I had, got kicked out of this yeshiva. I had trouble with those, but I was able to sit for a good part of the day and learn. Like, that wasn't the challenge for me. The challenge was to follow all the rules. So if a school found out I went to a movie and, gave me a slap on the wrist, or sometimes a little bit more, or I read a book they didn't like, then I ran into issues. But the day-to-day grind was okay. But as I got older, young 20s, I started dropping different things and walked away from it. Today, I'm excited about Shabbos. Like, I look forward to it. I'm thinking, what are some of those things? One is, no question, was first of all, one has just been over time, adding small things. It was a concept which I heard it from one person, a mentor of mine, which said to me about Shabbos, said, maybe you should do something for Shabbos. I said, I'm not ready. So maybe you do something. It's like, what? Take a shower before it. And it was these small, little, tiny things. Just, you're going into a day that's holy day. Okay, do everything you're doing. Take a shower, change your clothes before Shabbos. And that approach, I stopped doing different things slowly. So I stopped working, started taking a shower before, maybe dress differently, a meal. And over time, and then at one point in time, I said, okay, let me take this a little bit more seriously, right? And that's where I am now. I almost don't like using the term like Shomer Shabbos, because I find there's so many different things that I don't know, but I'm definitely, much more serious about it today. And I look forward to it. I'm excited about it. I want people to be in my house and experience it with me. Like, I feel it's some of the best I have to offer is a Friday night at my house. You've been a Friday night at my house, right? It's nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like it's some of the best to offer. And one of the people I got it from, I have a brother, an older brother, Hartzke, who you've met, maybe you'll meet, and he loves Shabbos, like crazy. So there were a couple of things that happened at the same time that led up to it. Besides for the fact that I had a mentor which was regularly telling me like, hey, Eli, Shabbos, 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 and I was adding small things, and it was done in a very gentle way. And each one I took it on, and it was like I was able to feel good about it. I didn't feel like I was breaking Shabbos. I felt like I was I'm doing something now, and it was meaningful. Beautiful. In some way. It was meaningful for Shabbos. Each one of those steps away were meaningful. I actually saw this in. I had this guy once who came over. He'd come by my office, ask for tzedakah. And he said, I said, what do you do for work? He said, sometimes I learn with guys. So I'm like, okay, so I was just going to give him, I'll learn with you. So what do you learn? The Kutei Maran, right? From Nachman of Breslov. So a few times I would sit, learn with him a little bit, and then help him out with what he needed. And he taught me this, was that like God appreciates every single thing. And I remember talking to the guy and he gave an example. He said, even something like, he said, someone driving a car on Shabbos. Like, so it wasn't in Kutei Maran, but the way he translated to me. Let's say someone's driving a car on Shabbos, and they did something different because of the fact, you know what, I'm parking with a friend, I'm going to leave the car on, so I don't have to turn it back on and off for Shabbos. Like, even something like that, like, would be of pleasure to God. Like, that was the way he translated.
You're saying is very correct. It's small things, each step. The Rebbe was asked by someone, how can I become your chassid? I'm sure you may have heard this. The Rebbe just said, just by doing one extra thing every day, just one extra thing.
Right.
Not by becoming this Torah-observant Jew in 2 weeks.
Right. The way I think I heard it was, do one thing that you're uncomfortable with.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right. No, maybe it was a different story.
Right.
He spoke to many people. Do one thing that you're uncomfortable with. And then eventually it becomes comfortable.
Right.
So then add one more. That's
Right.
not so step of the way. But there was something else that happened, like from when I started, okay, I'm like keeping Shabbos more seriously. One of the ways that was represented was by putting my phone away completely. One of the ways that it represented. So I was with my brother at the time. We spent a couple weeks together, and I saw like his
Koch.
just his energy and excitement for Shabbos. You know, he'd get really excited, talk about it like coming up, and then what he was doing, and I don't know, the meal he prepared, and everyone knew about it. Okay, it was Shabbos, and he was excited. He was visibly excited that Shabbos was coming. So I was like, wow, like what is this guy on? I want some. He's like, tell me Shabbos. I'm like, okay, Shabbos. So that was one, and then the other. Actually, I should have done it in the reverse order, but it was right around the same time that I was involved with this charity campaign to help a number of. It was like 550 Chabad houses, a little more, raised $50 million plus. And I was speaking to Rabbi Yossi Gordon, close with, and he said, Eli, you should like report it to the Rebbe. So I'm like, okay, I got some good news to report. Right, so I'm like, I will. So I wrote a letter, right? Then I included that. I also had some questions about other things, and it was like a fairly like direct letter about Shabbos. So I'm like, okay, and I was at the time in my brother's home, right? When I got this, it was right. I was with him for a couple of weeks. Staying with him. So I was in his home. I see his excitement. I get this letter about Shabbos. I was already doing more. And I said, you know what? This is my sign. But the main thing I was pointing to was his fire and his passion.
Sure.
And I would imagine that people seeing that, going back to what we spoke about with the Mizbeach earlier, and the way we got into this was talking about what you said, like bringing the fun back into it. Fun doesn't mean like frivolity, is that the word? It doesn't mean frivolous. It's fun for him, and I saw that. And today it's exciting. Fun for me.
It's beautiful. It has beauty.
It's fun for me. I'm looking forward to.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, to
not
Shabbos
a chore.
this week. No, not at all.
Not a bother.
Not at all. No, it's great. It's wonderful. And then on that you build different things. So, and you're talking about some of your conversation. We're saying, okay, how do we fix this? We've identified an issue. I think. Premise number one. There's a very, very, very severe infection that's infected every single family. Okay. Premise number two is, in order to solve it, we have to go like at the youngest levels to the kids.
Right, exactly.
Premise number three is that it's so foundational to the way the average person in the community believes, like the values that they hold. And I think one of the values has been what you pointed out, this idea of the Chassidish Bachar, this idea of everyone has to be funneled into this. And it's like, no, not everyone has to be funneled into that.
I'd like to use the word other also, because the level is so high, the bar is so high, that it takes a lot to be called a Chassidish Bachar. Every kid, although they may not admit it, wants to be called a Chassidish Bachar. But the second they walk outside and they, God forbid, didn't wear their hat for a block, no, that's not a Chassidish Bachar. Now I'm other. That's a problem.
Right.
It shouldn't be that way.
Right.
That's also Chassidish. It's not, that kid is walking down the street without a hat and jacket, could be learning Chitas and Rambam and davening 3 times a day, meticulously. He's not wearing a hat and jacket. Doesn't mean he's not a Chassidish Bachar. Of course he's a Chassidish Bachar. But we look at these external, manifestations of what we think a Chassidish Bachar should look like. You watch the movie. No.
Right, I'm thinking some of this about it practically. I spoke to Rabbi Harry Rosenberg, and he spoke a lot about like getting back into nature, right? That communities living off the land and having that, like that's some of what we need.
As you know, there's a lot of nature in Crown Heights, so that's going to go well.
But the concept, right? I was thinking from the concept of it was, in a community, you're going to have your water carriers, your doctors, like all of those things. And this just everyone boxed in. That's a foundational, fundamental thing to be able to look at our children and say, who are they? And maybe 5% or 10% are meant to be the Chassidish Bachars. And most probably are not. And by Chassidish Bachar, I don't mean a religious kid. I mean that 14-hour-a-day student. Right. That's what I mean.
Exactly. The kanoi, the extremist, but in a good way, the extremist.
Yeah. And we need some of those, and they belong 100%. Yeah, hold the community together. But it's not everyone. If you push everyone into that and everyone feels everyone feels secondary, then a lot of people feel not accepted, like they don't quite belong.
Exactly. Not everyone's academically motivated. Yocheved, I think I might have mentioned this before, so you'll forgive me if I'm saying this again. Yocheved was was academically brilliant, let's say. She did very well in school. And she said a very interesting thing. She went to non-Chabad high school. She went to modern Orthodox high school. But she said that the school that she came from in Crown Heights, the school would make it very difficult to assist a child who wants to go to college, right? Because Hasidic girls don't go to college. They'd make it very difficult, preparing for the SATs and, college guidance and so on, make it very difficult.
I remember dealing with this.
Right?
Trying to get my transcript
But
took a donation.
Here's the other side, which is very interesting. This is what makes the story interesting. She said in her school, the modern Orthodox school that she went to, everyone was expected to go to college. And if someone expressed an interest in opening up a flower shop out of high school or becoming a beautician, they were nice girls, good, regular girls, simple, let's say, frowned upon. So both are not good, she would say.
I love that you bring this example. I love it.
Both of them are not good. So people, some will go to college. Not everyone has to go to college. Some will go to yeshiva. Not everyone has to go to yeshiva. And she said, and she was friends with those girls. She was academically bright. She was friends with those girls that became florists and beauticians and she said both have to be.
Or business people.
Business people, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
We need some of those also.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is the recipe, and this is the only way you're going to be successful.
I love that you bring this example because what do I find with religion? Religion oftentimes allows someone to say, I get to stop thinking past this point. I don't have to think anymore. So here in this point, what are you saying? You're saying that every single parent, every single community has a societal pressure that they push on people. What happened, and the Frum communities do too. What's the difference? In the Frum communities, they put this societal pressure, this fear of parents, a fear that the parents have to resolve about their children going in ways that they themselves don't want to. They get to cloak it in holiness.
Right.
But really, it's just something that everyone has to deal with. When we see people doing things, there's an organization called PORC. Okay, it's Parents of Religious Kids.
That's beautiful.
Right? So it's for secular parents.
Jewish?
I don't know if it's Jewish. I don't know. I heard about it. I didn't really know. But the idea was so good to me. Here's a support group for parents of kids who become religious. Meaning, parents...
Oh, parents become religious?
No, parents of children who choose to become religious. So secular parents, my father is Baal Tshuva, his family thought he was crazy. My mother is more Sephardic, traditional. They just couldn't understand. They were already Jewish and Shabbos and kosher and doing these things, in more traditional ways, not, they couldn't understand why my mother went there, a bunch of kids, schools with 1 in 35, one teacher, 35 kids in a class, not that much secular education. They couldn't, so she had pressure. My mother had pressure from her family. My point is that this is everyone. This is society in general. If it's a family of doctors and one kid decides he wants to go to the army, there's going to be a level of disappointment. The problem is, and I think that in most environments, anywhere they go and they speak to their friends, it's okay, you have to learn to accept. You're not your child. But in a Frum community, in a religious community, sometimes you
manifest in religious.
Yeah, you get to cloak it in holiness. You get to talk to your friends like, yes, that's the way. And then they have a line from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said no television.
Right? They'll always have a line from the Rebbe.
Right, everything. The Rebbe has supported everything under the sun. So I had a line from the Rebbe here, but But you know what the difference between mine is?
What's that?
It said Tamid in the line. How many lines do we have? I said it should always be the case. It should always be the case. So I stand proudly behind the line that I introduced. It's not at some point in time it's supposed to happen.
I want to make clear though that what I'm saying here is not that I want schools to provide a secular curriculum, like pro secular education.
There should be some which should.
I'm just saying that has to be an option, because certain kids need it.
Right, but it's not an option in the way that there's an at-risk option for those. You're saying that
There are certain interests that kids have, and they can still be
Right.
from. It's fine.
Right. This push people into
Encourage it.
into a box.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything? Is there anything else from, like a fundamental value you see? I don't think we're going to get to everything in this conversation, but is there anything else besides for this concept of not trying to drive everyone into? It's not even driving everyone into this, because we already know we need room for others. You're saying something much more nuanced. Is those people are not other. They're not
exactly.
other. That's your.
That's
meaning,
my main. Only.
That's
my
your main point.
And only point.
Right. We've already accepted the fact that there are certain children who are at risk and they don't fit, so we need
Exactly.
schools.
That's
Like,
always
no,
gonna
they're
be the
not
case.
other. They're mainstream. This is every single day. The guy who's working, who doesn't get to learn 14 hours a day, not as a child and not as an adult, but he still wants to be very much part of the religious community. Not wants to be, is very much a part.
Exactly.
He's like, he is the cookie
very
cutter.
important. It's very
He is
important
the
to them.
cookie cutter religious person.
Exactly.
Right? The cookie cutter religious person is not a guy who can learn 14 hours a day necessarily. It's the guy who goes, has a job,
Exactly.
and right, not too many of us can get supported for learning.
Just financially, you mean?
No, we got to be like, you got to be
Right.
minds, right?
Listen.
How many people are we going to pay just, okay, you're going to go and learn? I'm not talking about the Kailo system. I'm saying in general, how many academics are we going to have where we say, you have such a brain? Like, for example, you like playing music. Everyone likes to think, like, who doesn't like that? Playing, listening. I'm saying it's enjoyable. But there's only a few people who are gifted enough to say, okay, you get to tinker with your piano and we're going to pay you for this thing because you're good enough at this thing. I'm saying it's the same idea academically. How many people are there? You say, okay, you're so bright that we're going to pay you to sit there and read these books also all day,
Right.
learn them, understand it well.
It's not about study necessarily only. It's about a way of life. And I'll argue that it's not only about there are only a certain amount of kids that will be able to study 14 hours a day. There are only a certain amount of kids that are going to be able to behave in such a way.
Right.
That very, very pure way. Some kids just want to be just regular kids.
Okay, you've been making this point a few times, and I see you don't feel like I'm hearing it, so I'm not hearing it, obviously.
Maybe
No,
you
no,
are, maybe
I'm
I'm
not.
not.
No, so say it again, 'cause I'm missing it,
Because to me,
obviously.
it's less about the academics, actually. But it translates it's about the way of life. There are only so many Bachrim that can be, hunched in that kind of way of life, hanging on every word that the Rebbe says, hanging on every sikha and mimer, hanging on, doing every miftzayim, every Friday hours of miftzayim, always in hat and jacket, that perfect kind of life. There are only a certain amount of kids that can
Or
do
even
that.
using the word perfect, you're contradicting yourself by saying that in some way. But I know, but you're programmed also by the machine.
Explain what I did.
Because when you said that perfect kind of kid,
No, in their mind, I'm not saying, of course, absolutely.
Right. No, it's that's
the ideal, let's say, yeah, well, you're right.
right.
Ultimately, you're right.
No, you're programmed by the machine.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's about that way of life. So how many kids can be that way?
Right. So you're saying something more. You're saying it's not just the learning. Even someone who does have that, saying there's this fiery passion from
A kid
the
is learning 14 hours
details.
of Gemara a day. Why are they learning 14 hours of Gemara a day? Because they're motivated by the religious coercion. They're motivated by the religious dogma that says you've got to learn Torah all day. Therefore, we'll learn Torah. Do you think they're inquisitive about an ox and a cow?
But some might be, right? Some are completely passionate about the whole of the, I don't know, the from life, meaning, let's say they're not amazing learners, but they're I had a friend in house who was very passionate about different concepts that the Rebbe spoke about in Sichas, and he'd constantly be compiling them and researching, and it wasn't coming from a place of learning as much. He was putting together booklets and designing it. He was just very passionate about different things, and a lot of the stuff he was almost Google searches. Like, it wasn't some brilliant academic mind. He was just passionate about this. It wasn't actually Google searches back then. I'm saying it was that. It didn't take a kind of rigorous academic approach. It was just, he was very passionate about different concepts, whether it's things the Rebbe said about Mashiach or things the Rebbe said about mikvah. And he kind of like,
got it.
But it was more, he was passionate about that life, and he wanted to share it with others, and he wanted to bring that. That's what you're saying, like that.
That's a minority.
That's a minority.
And the rest are struggling to keep up. They're struggling to keep up.
Right,
And
and stop suggesting this is the ideal.
And feeling other because of it. Excuse me. Feeling lesser because they can't keep up.
And stop suggesting this ideal. So in your, and having, let's say, a Lubavitch yeshiva is not enough for you.
A Lubavitch Yeshiva or Lubavitch Yeshiva?
No, Lubavitch yeshiva, like that. So meaning you have Ola Torah, which you mentioned, but you also have Vlad Shiva, which is, prominently Crown in Albany with a lot of
Vlad Shiva, he's trying to, in a way, do the same thing.
Right.
I'm not sure they're so far apart.
Yeah, I've felt like that a little bit. I was in Ocean Parkway growing up, which felt like more of, till like 3rd or 4th grade, I was in Ocean Parkway. And it kind of, several hours of secular. It definitely felt like they were trying to do both. There were sports, there was a basketball gym in the basement, there was, Ultra had it as well. I guess the sports.
Ocean Parkway today is like, when that's in Ocean Parkway today, it's like that. It's good.
Okay, and then at like 4th or 5th grade, I moved to the Crown Heights one, and there they had like, we'll have an hour at the end of the day with secular subjects, and an hour, 15 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of math, 15 minutes of history. It wasn't a curriculum. It wasn't a subject.
By the way, I ragged on my father, but I'll just say something good about my father. We went to school. All of us we had a secular education. He was not into this thing about, like they do today. We'll give you an hour of secular education at the end of the day. If you're doing it, just do it properly. Go to school and go all the way. If you're not doing it, okay, fine.
I have a major issue.
What's with this? Are we doing it? We're not doing it?
I have a major issue.
Excel, whatever you do.
I have a major issue with this idea of secular education. I don't understand what it means. How is math secular?
Oh.
How is English secular?
You just sparked.
I mean, is Onkelos, what language is Onkelos written in? There are a lot of rabbis. It wasn't only Onkelos, were major rabbis who wrote books that weren't in Lashon HaKodesh.
Well,
right?
let's take it to its bare bones. What you're saying is very, very true. I've been fighting this for 20 years. Those who know me know that I've been fighting this fight. One of the big reasons that a lot of the boys are very, very frustrated is because of their lack of a language skill. And the reason that they have lack of language skills, they taught this language, foreign language, called Yiddish.
They're illiterate in 3 languages.
Illiterate.
In 3 languages.
Right. But Yiddish was always considered the Hasidic language. Right? So that they always translated into Yiddish, but because the kids don't understand Yiddish, they have to go from Lashon Kodesh into Yiddish into English.
Right.
Which is absolutely ridiculous.
It's insane.
What's the argument? The argument is, the Rebbe said no secular education. Right? I've been fighting this fight for years, saying teaching a language, the indigenous language of a culture. We live in America. We speak English. Teaching kids how to express themselves in English is not secular education. They'll use that English to express Gemara, express Chassidus. There's nothing secular about it.
I have a different argument.
You're extending it to math and so on. I don't know, but I say this about language. And it's a big problem. And by the way, the kids are frustrated. I can see how they learn. They're frustrated. It's becoming a little better now. Frustrated.
It's more than frustrating. It's humiliating. It's humiliating to not be able to communicate. But I have a different argument. Forget whether English is appropriate or not. I don't know that I'd have a fundamental problem if we taught one language really well. For example, if we said, okay, Yiddish is the language, and the teacher spoke in Yiddish, and the books that were in Yiddish, and everything was in Yiddish all the way through, but it doesn't happen. But
we don't speak this at home.
That's the problem. That's what I'm saying.
Rabbi,
That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, forget English. Let's say you have a kid who learned French really well, and he can read, write, speak, communicate well in this language. He comes to America. He's not illiterate. He doesn't speak English well, but he's not illiterate.
Right.
If he never learned one language well, he's illiterate.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's not like Yiddish is given. The teacher barely speaks Yiddish.
Exactly.
He kind of speaks the Yiddish.
Exactly.
And then half the words he's peppering with English and peppering with Hebrew because he doesn't know the Yiddish words. I know I've sat in Yiddish classes.
Yiddish is Hasidic, that's why.
There's no one who's... I sat in Yiddish classes. I was considered a good student, but I didn't speak Yiddish, so I would end up in this... I had to be in the Yiddish class, but I couldn't understand anything. For a full year, I was in yeshiva, didn't understand anything.
And you tell me, right?
And then I started... Okay, I don't understand the people who speak Yiddish Hebrew. I could never get theirs, but the ones who speak Yiddish English, those... I got to the point where I considered those classes.
Right.
No one speaks Yiddish.
Right.
Okay, no one speaks Yiddish.
Exactly.
I've never met a single one who said brillen, like words like that. They would always the glasses, right? Or they'd say a Hebrew word, right? They always interject. My point is, my point is that there is no language that they're teaching. There is no full language that someone is getting, that the teacher is speaking, that it's the only one that they're reading and writing in, and then they say, okay, you're educated and you're literate in this language. So they end up being illiterate.
Rabbi Ben Sion of Darchim Nachum told me once that Lubavitch is the only group that insists on teaching kids in a language they don't think in.
Thank you. This is exactly what I'm saying. I would, if you went to Williamsburg, Right.
They speak Yiddish at home.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Everything is.
Yeah.
Everything is soup to nuts. They can think. They can do everything. Yes.
That's right.
I wonder, funny, my mom is French speaking, and till this day I think she counts in French. So that's my I think it's not only her. I think that people will always count. You can start thinking in your language, but they'll always count in their original, like their mother tongue. So I wonder, like the average kid in Altar, like what language are you counting in?
Combination of a Mishka bubble of everything.
Right, and that's a problem. But even when you said the issue with math, how can you build a sukkah if you don't know math? How can you forget a calendar if you don't know math? There's so many things we need math for. It's not.
So I've actually changed. So you're getting into secular education. This is, you saying it's not secular. I've changed my whole view on this over the years. And when I was much younger, I used to think, why isn't there secular education in the schools? And then I started realizing that this idea of success breeds success. That let's say we taught Gemara well. Let's say we gave kids a well-adjusted Torah from education and taught them basic English and basic math skills.
That's what I'm talking about. That's
basic,
what I'm saying.
Not full-fledged, nothing, no Regents, nothing. If you're successful, if you have a successful student and they have a successful high school career, chances are if they choose to go to college, if they choose to go into business or become a lawyer or a doctor, they'll be successful in that. They'll catch up easily. And we see this with our Lubavitch, the young in Lubavitch today. We have a lot of professionals. They went to Altair, went to Lubavitch Shiva, didn't have that secular upbringing, and did well.
By the way, this is what I'm referring to. When I say
success breeds success. I always tell my kids, you be successful Gemara, if that's what you're doing. By the way, I gave my two boys a choice. They went to Lubavitch Shivas because they wanted to, not because I forced them to.
Right.
You can ask them. Because they once told me, Heather goes to this modern Orthodox science school, why don't we? I said, by all means. You want me to spend $125,000? You got it. No, I think we'll stay in Crown Heights, So, but they chose to do it, and yet I said, you want to be successful later? Success breeds success. Do well in whatever you're doing now. If you choose to catch up later, you'll be fine.
Yeah. And by the way, this is what I'm referring to. I'm not referring to a full-fledged, understanding world history, philosophy, and everything else. Right. I'm talking about these basic things that, to me, are literacy. Basic math,
couldn't agree more.
English, or some language.
Yeah.
You want to do it Hebrew? Fine, good. So teach soup to nuts, have a whole environment, and that's
what. You got it first foremost.
Obviously, with us, the parents are speaking in English. I 100%. 100%
in America,
agree
got to teach English.
Right. Is that someone has to be able to think, read, write language.
Well, and Israeli kids learn Hebrew.
I've employed many people who've come through the STEM, and the ones who cannot read and write, it's not frustrating. It's actually humiliating. It's humiliating for them. And they end up angry. They end up very, very angry with good reason. It's like you had me as a child, and now I'm struggling to read a book. What? Read a book? Why is this? I can't write an email? I had a guy who worked for me. We sent him. We spent a few years to GED to get a diploma. He wasn't comfortable interacting with anyone outside of the company because he didn't want people to see his writing. He couldn't write an email. He was humiliated. It's like people are going to think I'm stupid. He wasn't stupid. He just was raised by stupid people. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. He's uneducated. Yeah, and to me, some of those things are unacceptable. We're going off a little bit on
tangent,
on a tangent. But I think, so I think we've touched on a lot. There's much more to say. There's much more to say here.
Absolutely.
There's much more to say here, but there are certainly, and you can hear that, very, very, very deep infections within the community, systemic, that have hit every single family. I'm not saying it's not in the rest of society. It's everywhere. I understand how some of this came about. We're trying to protect from other infections. I understand all of that, but we have to look at the results. We have to look at where it's at. And I would argue that someone who disagrees is because they have not seen the truth. They have not seen the truth. The people who have gotten to a place where others are comfortable opening up with them. I cannot tell you how many shluchim have called me about their sex addictions. I cannot tell you how many I've spoken to over the years. This is everywhere, and it's not the people you think. It's not the people who are fry. I'm talking about functional lives, struggling, addiction, cheating. There's so many issues. That's what I've spoken about. Sexual abuse, dealing with terrible trauma and all sorts of issues. I'm not talking about the people who fried out. I'm talking about even the people within the community. It's touched everyone. terrible anxiety, terrible depression, terrible stuff. And then some of these issues you start seeing in the kids. So recognizing that there is a very issue. Now, how to address it? Okay, we may disagree. I live my life very differently than others, but that it must be addressed, 100%. And on that note, I'll say Shabbos is coming. We're very excited.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I
Avremi.
appreciate it.
I'm excited to spend Shabbos with you.
Likewise. Thank
There
you.
we go. All right, so we're back after a brief break. You see, it looks like seconds to the audience, but it's about 1,000 calories in between the two people. We're here. When we went off, we realized that maybe there's one of the subjects we're touching on in order to round out this discussion. Took a little bit of break, washed our face, ate some food. Now we're back.
Sure.
How was lunch?
Lunch was great.
So, what did you want to add to?
So I realized after we completed the last segment that we mostly spoke about the boys' schools and what boys are doing.
Right.
And we weren't touching on some very important topics that affects girls.
Right. Which, as you mentioned, is something that you're actually more. It's an area that you've more knowledge about. More women speak to you.
More women speak to me.
Right.
Yeah. And one of those topics that I'm really passionate about, it's interesting that I allow myself to talk about it because I actually have a rule that men shouldn't really talk about issues that pertain to women. Let the women deal with it. It's not really our business. But this is the topic of tznius.
Gotcha.
Laws of modesty. A Jewish girl is supposed to dress in a modest way. First and foremost, one is expected to behave in a modest manner. I think that's what really means tznius. And part of that is dressing in an elegant way, a way that's not provocative, elegant, classy, and so on. So there are a whole bunch of rules in place. Some of these rules kind of make sense, and some of these rules make absolutely no sense.
When you say rules, you're not talking halachic laws.
Yeah, I mean, people say it's halacha. I mean, again,
Right.
People are going to jump on me for this. It says in the Shulchan Aruch this. But at the end of the day, what are we expecting? What's the goal? The goal is to have an elegant woman who carries herself in an elegant, classy manner. But we've reduced it to a set of rules. How long the skirt should be, 3 inches, 4 inches below the knee, the elbow length, so on. The girls in the school have these tznius buttons where the top button has to be closed. So maybe those rules make a little sense. I don't know. Then there are all rules that have to do with the color of clothing. No nail polish. No bright colors. And different rules. Different schools have different the thickness of the stockings, for example. And that falls under the category of we're pushing down on the will of the girl to express herself. This is that's dressing is all about expressing yourself. You want to look a certain way. You want to dress a certain way. So, and what's happened is that this subject is talked about incessantly over years, and girls are punished for breaking the rules. But yet,
And this would be distinct from a school uniform. Sometimes you can have a school uniform and rules that.
correct. Actually, interesting you say that because school uniform is great because then you don't have to blame it on anything else. You can just say school uniform. So that's actually a great solution. But young people are very creative and they find ways to buck the system, so they'll push the boundaries of the school uniform and get castigated for it, get penalized for it, and so on.
Okay, so say there's a school uniform and then there's a sweater that may go on.
Sweater or the skirt's a little low, a little tight, this kind of thing,
Right.
They push. And the girls know that. They're pushing. It's like this fight going on between the children and the parents / educators. The situation has gotten worse. When I say worse, the goals have not been accomplished. Their goals, the goals of the people trying to push all of this, have gotten worse, if anything, not better. Why is that? So I think the reason has to do with level of difficulty of enforcing or teaching these rules. It's harder to really teach a concept a very kind of nuanced concept on a foundational level versus saying, these are the rules, follow them.
Right.
Right? So I often give the example of a shliach that walks into town and says, and meets a woman on the street who looks Jewish, and he says to her, hey, are you Jewish? She says, yeah, I'm Jewish. The rabbi says, the way you dress, pants, Jews we don't wear pants. You should be wearing pants. Would that story ever happen? Obviously not.
Right.
But rather, he would befriend this person. They'd come over to the Chabad house. They would meet his wife. And over a long period of time, this person may want to emulate the role models that are the shliach and his wife. Because I want to be like them. They're good people. I want to be like them. And part of being like them is carrying myself in a dignified fashion. And then naturally, it'll all fall into place. So essentially what I'm saying is that we're talking about it too much. And we're talking about it now, right? But we're talking about these rules too much. Teach a person how to be dignified and classy. They'll figure out how to be modest. That's all I have to say about that. I mean, I'll just say that there's I was involved in one story where a Balchuva family, and their daughter started wearing pants, and this will dovetail into a different topic. Daughter started wearing pants, and the mother would not let her daughter into the apartment because she was wearing pants.
Into the apartment.
Yeah, her own house.
Let her home.
Yeah, you have to. And this girl was 20 years old, and I went over to her and I said, well, you've had your chance to educate your daughter and ask her to do all these kinds of things way back. Now your job is just to love her. And she gave in, and
right. And you've had the first 20 years of her life in order to impress.
But I'll argue that the same should even apply to younger girls. That this topic, this idea of being tznius, modest, elegant, should be taught in a very kind of organic way rather than a set of rules. Because obviously that's not working. And
so when you say it's not working, what's not working about it?
Well, girls are rebelling. No, I won't dress that way. I'll dress the way I want to dress. And more girls are. It's obvious. I mean, you can talk to people in Crown Heights that less are following these so-called rules. So the establishment is not. They're not achieving their aims.
Let me push back a little bit, right? So people are going to rebel on anything, right? They're all going to push on whatever it is. When I was in yeshiva, I found this like black hat in Zara. It was like a $25 hat. And this is what I would wear for my hats, like a little tiny brim. This is what I wore for my hats. Like, okay, it's not quite the hat, but it's okay. Then I had this jacket that was dark enough, but it was really like a denim jacket, right? But it was dark enough that no one bothered me. There at once, I bought this horribly ugly shirt. It was terrible. It was a white shirt, and it had this pattern sewn underneath it. And you can kind of see the pattern. It was a multicolored pattern. You're not sure if you're seeing it or not. Like some white shirts then can be a little see-through.
Right.
So instead of seeing tzitzis, you're seeing this kind of multicolored pattern. And I remember when I walked into yeshiva once with the shirt, and the Rosh Yeshiva was like looking and looking, and I see him like looking at me, and finally calls me over. He's like, whatever that is, take it off, put it back on perm. Like he couldn't quite figure out what it was. So when I point with that story was that there's an aspect of pushing that always exists. So if they say, okay, we're going to go to talking about buttons up here, then the pushing is going to be one button down. But if they said, a little bit further, then the pushing would be one button down.
My point is, don't say anything. Just be good role models. There's also plenty of cases where they don't walk the walk. So a lot of teachers are now. I can ask my wife about this, and even in her experience as a high school student, where they push all these rules, but they themselves would wear these long earrings, or red lipstick, which is a no-no apparently.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. So the point is to teach it in a different way, not by rules. To teach it in an organic way, because you want to be an elegant person, you want to be a classy person, you want to be a private person, And this kind of thing of just check. It's easy just to make rules. We turnished, they're saying.
Right.
Not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that, not allowed to do that. It's easy.
Right. And it feels like every time someone's a little creative, like that becomes the rule.
That becomes exactly.
I think.
Yeah.
All right. I came to yeshiva in Miami. It's in South Beach, right? And South Beach is South Beach. It's one of the party cities in America. And on the rules were no going past 14th Street unless you're going to the cleaners. No going past this unless you're going to that. I was like, oh, these are all the ideas. I'm getting all the ideas from the previous years of what to do.
That's exactly right.
So your main point is kind of the obsession.
Obsession.
Sneeze.
And by the way, it leads into all kinds of mental health issues as well.
Okay, so let's talk
Because
about
they
that.
can't express themselves. They feel uncomfortable. They feel body shamed because they're constantly being told you're not dressed in a good way. Who wants to be told they're not being dressed? It means you're not looking good. You don't look proper. You don't look the way society expects you to look. So there's a lot of and for girls, it's much more important than guys. Like, what did you say earlier? Guy gets up in the morning and just
right
looks good naturally. For girls, it's a big
That's
deal.
what I said.
So we should actually look for ways to say yes, not to say no. We should look for rules that we can actually bend. That's okay, actually. In the broadest scope of things, let's allow that. Let's pick the real issues that are meaningful, instead of just the easy way out, just carte blanche.
Is part of your issue that the obsession, because that's what you seem to be saying. There seems to be an obsession with these rules, focus on sneeze.
It's not exactly.
Versus saying, hey, maybe connecting it to an early part of our conversation, is that someone not dressing sneeze, right? I'm not talking like pushing the envelopes all the way, but someone not wearing a bright colored sweater. Let's say that bothers the head of the school. You're saying if there's something there, then it's a reflection of your own inability to make yourself desirable of emulation.
Well put.
Right.
Exactly.
Don't blame it on.
Exactly.
Don't blame it on them for reminding you of that. Okay.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't achieve their goals anyway. So what's the point?
But is this?
And also, there's another issue when you make all these rules. I mean, I don't want to get into graphic detail about women's clothing, but you know that you can keep all the rules and look very provocative. At the same time, just a regular, simple person who has a, sleeve above their elbow, just a simple dress will look very elegant and modest.
Correct.
You know that. You walk into Crown Heights and you see all these fancy shaitels and fancy dresses, but they're following the rules because it's below the knee and
Right. Sometimes the letter of the law.
Exactly.
Will destroy the spirit of the law.
Exactly. So. And
sometimes there's a way to maintain the spirit.
Right.
Without the.
So I've always been passionate about this, but in the last couple of years, I really seen how it affects the mental health of the
right, and that's why you're bringing this up. You're bringing this up. Is sometimes the obsession coming from men, and is that part of the problem? Meaning
men are making the rules. That's exactly the problem. Women are following along, sure, but the fact that men are talking about it, and the male
right,
educators
kind of mix out.
Just leave it alone.
Mix out.
Just leave it alone.
Mix out of this one. Let the women deal with
it.
These issues. Yeah. I think that many of the sneeze articles I've read are from men.
Exactly.
This may be an extreme version of this to make the point, but it says there was something about pornography, like what is and what isn't, and when it should be shown, and some case related to some pornography came up to the Supreme Court, and obviously you have like, is nudity pornography? Not necessarily. It could be fine art.
Fine art. Yep.
So some of this discussion came up in front of the Supreme Court, and one of the justices, I forget which one. He's like, so what is pornography and what isn't? He says, I can't tell it to you, but I know it when I see it.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of like that. You're going to try to describe it, and then someone will be able to get around it.
Exactly. So you can tell. Exactly.
Right. But you know it.
Right.
You know it when you see it.
Because beyond the rules, you can tell if someone's modest or they're not modest. Exactly.
Right.
And that's what should be taught.
Is this?
By osmosis, by role modeling, not by checking the boxes.
Okay. And even this is somewhat a violation of it, but you're saying meaning even this, us discussing this topic is somewhat of a violation of the idea, but...
Exactly, but we're doing it. Yeah, exactly.
Right, we have to do it in order to make the point that it shouldn't be done. It's that important.
Exactly right.
Okay, good. So I hope that people hear you and understand why it was important enough for us to come back on and talk about this specifically, because I think most of the ideas you have are coming from the challenges you're seeing from people who are coming to you
for sure
for help.
For sure.
Right. So, okay, good. May it be received in the way it was delivered.
Amen. Thanks, Ali.
In the place.